This thing on. Blah 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 blah. I don't know. Hello, it's Liz, and today, we are talking again. Yes. Yesterday on my Instagram account, the line layer, follow it if you would like say in future videos. I asked a question on there for suggestions. I have a screenshot here on art and writing topics because there's so many things I like to talk about, but then sometimes I get overwhelmed by all the options. And I'm like, well, what do people want to hear? And considering I have 6 followers on my account, it might have been unrealistic to expect a response, but I got one from my friend Thomas, who also makes comics. In fact, he has a comic on Webtoon called A Wish That Blooms in Fall. Which is very beautifully done, very beautifully drawn. I also just happened across his Instagram page to make sure I remembered that correctly. And he also notes that he is a squirrel whisperer, and that would be accurate. So if you are in touch with squirrels, I would also recommend checking him out. Anyway, I have a screenshot of the question he asked, and here I will read it to you now. How do you write a character from scratch, like personalities and all that? I like that question. Thank you for that question, Thomas. That being said, that question has like 4 million answers that it could have. I could be talking about this forever, and I was thinking yesterday when I posted this and got the response, I was like, well, how do I approach this? Because there are so many different roads to take, and I have just come to the conclusion that I'm going to talk about my own personal method because that is what I know the most about, and in doing that, that means that my advice today will be very applicable to some people, and it won't be to other people. So I'm just throwing this out here to let you know this is what I do, and it very well may not be the method that other people do, and that is okay. This is just me sharing my own thoughts. Anyway, before I give my more practical advice, I will kind of give a little backstory on how I even got into character stuff to begin with. To kind of show you where I'm coming from here. When I believe I was 6, if I'm correct, I made up a little daydream world. I still remember the names of the characters in this daydream world. I don't remember, like, consciously making this world up, but it existed for like 6 or 7 years for me when I was very young. The characters in the world, their names were Mark, Andrew, Katie, Tony. There were a few other ones. What were their names? I don't know. There's a group of like 6 kids, and their whole storyline was they went to school during the day, but then they had this underground like clubhouse at night where they would go and like solve mysteries and stuff. It was I don't know. There wasn't like a solid plot because I was 6 when this came into existence. I spent pretty much all of my free time daydreaming about this, and again, it wasn't like a conscious decision. I just dropped something. It was it just happened. It's just where I was. At school, at home, I would pace in circles and I'm dropping everything. I'm dropping everything today. At home, I would pace in circles for hours, just daydreaming about Mark and Andrew and Katie and all them. And then at school, I would daydream about Mark and Katie and all them. And then at recess, I would daydream about it. And you can kind of guess that this is just what was going on 24/7. I still remember what they looked like, and I remember the exact outfits they wore. I don't know why. When I was around the age of what age? What age? Would have been like 11, maybe. I think it was 11. Their world slowly, I want to say disappeared, but it didn't really disappear as much as it just shifted into kind of a new thing. And then with new characters that somewhat resembled my older characters, but they weren't the same as my older characters. And then what happened is over the years, this process would loop over and over again. So my previous world would kind of mold into a newer world with newer characters that resembled characteristics of my previous characters, but they were still newer characters. And that leads us to the comic I have today, which I think is by far the most detailed of worlds that I have, which makes sense because by this point in time, I've been through multiple worlds. So now that I'm here at the one I'm in now, understandably, the characters and the world is at its most developed point because it has had so many years to kind of morph, if that makes sense. Evolve? Maybe that's a better word. All this to say, this story is why I have such a hard time explaining how to make characters, because I don't really remember making most of them. They just kind of show up. Like the characters I have now, for example. I won't give spoilers, but I will say the names of the characters in the first book I'm working on right now. They're names of the main characters, the main four, we'll say, for book one. Myrtle, Wade, Bruce, and Elsie are their names. And there are three other main characters, but they are not relevant in the first book. So, well, they are, but not. No spoilers. No spoilers is the rule. We will not spoil. But Myrtle, Wade, Bruce, and Elsie, my four characters I have present day, they have characteristics from worlds and characters before. So they've had time to kind of evolve into themselves now because they kind of were birthed, spawned from previous characters. So that's why I'm so I love this topic. I love this question because character creation is my favorite thing in the world. Like my mind literally, I feel like all it wants to do is think about characters, which when writing comics is an amazing thing. But then when doing anything outside of that, like if I'm not doing an activity relevant to comics, then it's kind of just a hindrance because my mind is... Anyway, that's a topic for another day. All this to say, it's complicated. It's complicated how to make characters because sometimes they just show up unannounced at your door and you just let them in, you know? And you don't know how they got there. But I have been thinking about it. And I have some tips that I do think I have used on these characters after they showed up that might be helpful or even applicable before you've even made the characters. So say you're writing a story or you're about to write a story and you want personality tips. I do think I have some tips that could just be generally helpful in kind of fleshing out your character a bit beforehand. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I hope this intro made even a slice of sense. Comment down below if you had a nice slice of sense from this intro. My word. So my first point is personality types in general. There are multiple systems like MBTI, Myers-Briggs. I know the Enneagram is another personality system. I don't know too much about that one, so I can't speak on it. But sometimes these can be helpful. Even if you don't want to go into depth. For me, MBTI, I am in depth. I am at the bottom of the MBTI sea, absorbing every drop of info there is, so it's hard for me to talk about this lightly, but I'm sure that even if you just looked up basic personalities, you would have a good starting point. Like, let me give an example here. Say you have a character that is an ISTP, we'll say. If you looked up in fact, let me look up, because I don't know what the light's description of this would be. Okay, so here we have some basic points of the ISTP. They're action-oriented. ISTPs are doers who are focused on the present and are happiest when they can use their technical skills to solve problems. They are practical. ISTPs are realistic and logical, and they independent. ISTPs are self-motivated, hands-on. There's a list of stuff. Me, being myself, when I see this, I want to go into the individual cognitive functions. But you don't have to do that, realistically. Which pains me to say. I want to do that. But you can just, like, if you're someone who's just looking for a baseline, you can look at a personality typing system, whatever it is, and just kind of get a starting point. And mind you, this is a starting point. Like, you can't just look up ISTP and then you have a fleshed out character, because MBTI, really all it talks about, and this probably goes for every personality typing system, it's it's gonna tell you the basics of how their mind works and what their preferences are. So like ISTPs, they're more present focused, more technical with their skills, but that doesn't tell us the in-depths of like what they've been through and maybe what they're scared of in like that list. You have to come up with the unique elements of the character, and that makes it fun. It kind of helps you make a unique character. And actually one thing that I like about it as well is it kind of gives you variety if you're aware of all the different personality types, because it makes you kind of, for me personally, MBTI, I have so much fun. Originally I looked into it largely to help just understand people in general, but it really is such a great thing for characters too, because once you are thinking about all the different personalities, you kind of more naturally make characters that fall into different personalities, so you get good variety of people coming at the story from different perspectives. Like you have an ISTP, you have an ENFP maybe, and that's not their fleshed out character, but it's a baseline to build upon. It's like the little foundation to put your happy little character house on top of. Now, is this necessary? Do you need to know your character's MBTI type or personality type before writing them? No, because most of the time, I didn't know that beforehand. Even with the story I'm writing right now, I don't think I knew that for all the characters beforehand. I knew a few, but I didn't know all of them. And your character, regardless of if you know MBTI or not, they are going to have a type just because everyone has a personality. So it's not like you need to know that information, but it might be helpful if you are someone who's looking for inspiration or looking for a way to flesh it out and you don't already kind of have a baseline. So that's just one little tip that I have off the bat. If you want, let me know. If anyone watching this, my 2 subscribers, Alessandro and the other subscriber, I don't know your name, just let me know and I'll make it an MBTI video, because I could talk about that for 10 years. If you are interested in being in prison for that long, comment below. My second point, my second place of inspiration for a character is your own life, your own experiences. And I don't mean, when I say this, I don't mean a self-insert character. I find personally, and I'm not saying you can't do a self-insert character necessarily, but for me it's just not as fun. Most of my characters aren't like me, and the ones that are like me, I've had a few in the past that have bordered on being too much like me, or too much like someone I know in real life. What happens there, at least for me, and this is my own personal experience, if I'm writing a story with a character that is too much like me and I do not know how to explain this in a normal way, it feels like an invasion of privacy. It's like, okay, I don't really want people to read this, and I don't really want to work on it now because I don't want it to be finished and I don't want it to be read. Maybe that's just a personal issue though. Another thing, probably a bigger, like more legitimate point. If you make a character exactly like someone you know in real life, especially like a main character, you are kind of subconsciously, or maybe unconsciously is a better word, putting limits on that character, because now you might not want them to do a specific thing because you're like, well, this person or I wouldn't do this thing and this character is like me, so they're not going to do that because I wouldn't do that. And I don't know, I feel like it restricts your character's freedom. It's not a given. I'm sure you can do it well, but in my personal experience, I don't like to make characters that are too much like reality, because then I feel like they are boxed in by the rules of either yourself or the person they are based off of. So what do I mean by real life inspiration then, if I don't mean copying? I basically mean you can take your feelings or your experiences or just things like that and take the core of that and put it into a different experience. Does that make sense? I'm going to use my character Elsie as an example here. There are other characters I could use as an example, but I feel like Elsie is probably the most spoiler-free one because her story's not like a secret in the book when it's done, so I'm going to use her. My character, Elsie Tack, she lives in a castle. She is the general's daughter. She's not a princess. She's like the general's daughter, future general of their kingdom. And she, her whole life, has had a very limited view of the world, and that does cause her some problems. This is a small example of me taking something from my own life and putting it onto her. I do not live in a castle. My dad is not a general of the kingdom. I don't even live in a kingdom. But the aspect of being sheltered and kind of a little bit alone, while the circumstances and the reasons for why are vastly different, the core feeling of not really having a place outside in the world is familiar to me. So her core struggles, while her experiences are different and while her personality is different, there are elements of her core issues that come from my own experience. Does that make sense? Another example of one of my characters actually would be my character Wade. He loves art and he's a bit of a recluse. You could say both of these things are a little bit true for me as well. But he likes different kinds of art. He likes painting realism, which is something I could never do. You could not point a gun to my head and tell me to paint a realistic picture. It's just not going to happen. And then also, he is reclusive differently than me, because he goes outside. all a way of saying he's maybe better than I am. All this to say, there are elements of familiarity, whether they be the deeper core struggles behind the character's external experiences, or they be kind of like a slightly different version of the character's external experiences. You can take parts of yourself and kind of twist them to not look that way in your characters. And this is good because it makes your character their own person. You know, they feel unique, they feel like themselves. So that's my tip. Take parts of yourself, bits and pieces, and kind of chip them apart and spread them about like little sprinkles on your character's unique cupcake of themselves. That's my analogy. My final point, and this is the most applicable to me, but it also might be the most unhelpful depending on the person, is to just daydream about a bunch of pointless nonsense. And I do mean pointless nonsense. Most of my daydreams, even though my story that I'm writing right now is pretty in-depth and there is like a continuous plot that has a lot of more serious points to it, the daydreams I have, a lot of them actually have nothing to do with that. They're very slice of life-y. They're very like simple, very like characters just existing in the world on the day-to-day, having their interactions, and it seems pointless in the grand scheme of the story. It could be, but the daydreams are actually quite helpful in helping you, the writer, get to know your character. And if you, the person writing them, you know the character very well and you think they're fleshed out, then it is more likely that the reader will get that same impression. So I'm not saying you have to write down every single daydream you have. In fact, I would advise against that. I used to do that like way back in the day, and it resulted in me having like scripts that were 15 notebooks long when I wasn't even that much into the story. It's not good. Don't do that. So I'm not saying write down every daydream, but I'm saying just let your daydreams do their thing. You know, let them go where they need to go, even if that is to the middle of nowhere. Just let them exist, because they will help you flesh out your character better. And yeah, that's my advice. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, or at the very least provided perspective on other things you could try to do. Even if I hope it provided options, we'll say. Have an absolutely fabulous day in life. Goodbye.